Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. This is episode number 117.
117.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a special number or not, but we're just glad you're joining us. My name is Greg Harris. I am the senior pastor at the sponsoring church called Olive Branch Community Church. We are glad you're joining us out there on YouTube. And thanks for your comments. But we're also excited that all of you out in the podcast world are still listening and still connecting. And hey, we're going to be diving into all kinds of interesting things today. If you're new to the podcast, we want to welcome you. This is essentially a podcast where we are responding to the sermon that was given by either me or somebody else on Sunday morning, and maybe stuff that was dropped or questions that were led. And we pretty much want to chase the truth wherever it runs. And that's the idea. I did it without looking.
And I didn't even see him glance over.
Right. I looked at you in the eye.
He's growing up. Our little boy is becoming a mature little man.
That makes me really feel uncomfortable since I am the youngest here. But anyway, my friends over there.
And I can't really say our little boy because you are younger than Greg. Right?
No, I'm older than Greg.
Oh, are you really? Mm-hmm. So our little boy.
Yeah.
All right.
This is okay. And my parents,
more gray,
apparently, are my co-parent. This is really weird. We're not even going to my co-host here. Why don't you guys go ahead and say hi since you started that weird?
Brent started that weird.
Yes, he did.
I started everything weird.
My name is Stephen Oldham. I'm the local outreach coordinator here, and let us know where you're listening to us right now. If you're listening and watching on YouTube, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Do one thing for me, though. If you like the episodes, write a comment or something that you're attaining to that, but also just let us know by subscribing, but also just by sharing it with your friends. I think that's the best way. If you know some Christian friends or people that could be blessed by something that you heard, I think it's good to share, and that way people get it around. We get some good positive feedback lately of some of the stories of people listening, so I thank you for that. But if you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, let us know as well. Subscribe there.
And my name is Brent. I am the Connections Pastor here at Olive Branch Church, and we would love to hear your questions. We got some questions today. I mean, book of questions. So we may or may not get to all of them, but we will try. But keep those questions coming. We would love to talk about them and discuss them. And they don't have to be related to the series. They can be any theological question you are dealing or struggling with. So keep those coming. We look forward to them. And again, we have not heard boo from any of you guys. If you want us to do a live podcast again this summer and letting us know, what months might work good for you guys. So again, we're thinking about it, and we would love to order more shirts. So let us know if you need some shirts too.
Shirts.
Boom chakalaka.
Maybe we can do hats.
Ooh, hats. I hate hats.
Why? Maybe we can put hair on them.
Yeah, I would wear that.
Yeah. Maybe a rabbit ears.
Yeah, I would wear that.
Maybe a mullet.
All right, so let me just ask you guys a question.
Wait. Do you have any terrible jokes?
I do. That's the question I need to ask you guys.
Brenton's terrible
jokes.
Do you
guys want a cute, terrible joke, or do you want a cringeworthy?
Oh, boy.
Wait.
Bad joke?
I don't know if you know the difference.
No, I know the difference.
Well, for our children listeners, why don't we go with cute?
Cute.
Cute?
We have children listeners?
You guys are so G.
I'm so G.
You're
Thanks.
so G.
I'm OG.
What's up?
Yeah.
G. Sup?
My name is Greg, so I guess I used to think people would say that, like, what's up, G? I'm like, hey, yeah, that's cool. Some people, and then just turn around and say that to somebody else. I'm like, oh, that wasn't like a cool nickname for me. That sucks.
So here's the joke then.
So G.
What is the best way to communicate with God? Email. Boom chakalaka. And I will say, just since I tend to ask questions and not really care what people think, I'm going to go ahead and do the other one too.
Oh, okay.
Why did God create man first? Because he didn't want constant advice and criticism. All right. So, those of you who felt that was cringeworthy.
Yeah, let me guess.
For the rest of our female listeners, thank you for continuing to listen.
I came across that one and just thought, wow, I could really irritate a lot of people with that one. But
I think,
but sometimes the the comedy is worth the pain.
So maybe we should start voting on the jokes. Like we just like, oh, that was a funny one. No, that's not. You know, like yeah. Oh, it's like.
Yeah. And again, I don't know how many of you like these bad jokes or don't like these bad jokes, but you could send some messages in to rabbittrail@obcc.church and let us know. Keep them coming or stop them.
That is like an email message, not like we used to call like dog doo-doo in the backyard messages. And I'm just thinking there might be some people who send that in too. So
really?
Toward you.
And one of the things we were talking about here, because we kind of do this before we go on air, is Stephen usually reads a lot of the hate comments that we get from YouTube or other places. So we thought it would be kind of fun maybe to do a segment called, Stephen reads the
hate mail.
The hate mail. It's kind of like the mean tweets things that celebrities do, and just kind of.
There's a number of them.
There's a number of them. So if you want to hear some of those,
here's some responses.
Then let us know, and we will.
Just like a lightning round where he reads it and you respond. He reads it, I respond, back and forth, or he responds.
Live response to
live responses. So he'll put together a list that he can start reading now, and if people want to hear it, and you guys got to let us know. We try to make this interactive, and so come on, people, do your part. Be interactive.
Trying to give some jingles here. Just
jingle.
Picking out some.
All right. So again, we are discussing on episode 117, and we're still in the sermon series, Assumptions Gone Viral, and that is, what do people outside the church assume about Christianity? And we've hit numerous topics, and this one today was that Christianity is about being a good person, that's the assumption out there. So what say you guys?
No, I already said what I think.
Oh, yeah. So if you want to go listen to that message, and, it was only like 37 minutes long, so it's one of the shorter messages. Go ahead and pause and go listen to that message, and then come back here to hear the discussion.
Okay. That was an interesting idea.
And then, Greg can just remain silent because he already said all he wanted to say about the subject. So,
no.
I know. I'm just kidding.
But you could do that with every one of our of these. Go back and listen to the sermons. They're right there in the YouTube place.
They are right there.
Yeah.
And
but should start putting the links there.
So again, just coming into this subject,
more organized.
Coming into this subject, and then we're going to take a couple of takes on this too. I think that'll be interesting. I would just say, is Christianity about being a good person? And I would say the Bible doesn't even teach that, right? In Romans 3, it says no one is good, no one does good, and gives a long list of reasons why man is not good. So I do think that Christianity is not about being a good person. It's understanding that we are not good, that we can't improve our situation.
That's kind of why I use the idea of like it's another self-help or self-improvement kind of thing, because I think a lot of people like I think your dad's comment you mentioned is what I was trying to get at. I think in the church, actually, this assumption has held a lot. Like I'm here and I come to church because it's going to improve my life. I'm going to have a better life. Your dad's vision before he was a Christian was like, my life was good. Like, why would I need to go to church? Like,
I need to be a better person. I'm doing pretty good so far.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's this kind of like, it's about self-improvement. It's about even self-help kind of stuff. It's about improvement or whatever you want to call it.
And I do think that part of the issue with my dad, and this was before he became a Christian, and I was having conversations with him, is number one, he didn't see a need for God because he was already a good person. I'm a good person, and really, I mean, his whole thought process is, if the God that you say is a loving God is going to condemn me to hell, and I'm a good person, I've never done anything significantly enough to even warrant jail time, then there's something wrong with him, not me. I'm good. And I'm like, oh, okay, Dad, that's not the way it works. No one is good. But I think also he was looking at it, his need for God in his life, and looked at his life, and he even said, I'm living a good life. I am happy with my life. I'm content with my life. I have a good family. I have a great marriage. I have everything I want. And so I think from a pragmatic standpoint, he was just thinking my life is good, so I don't need God. And again, I think that that number one, I do think that being a Christian. Well, let me just get your feedback on Christianity being good person, and then I'll finish my thought later.
Well, no, I was going to ask the question, even just you mentioned your dad, so that's one example, but I just wanted to know what kind of example are the kinds of people that we've run across in the church that think that, or outside in the community that actually think, it's Christianity is about self-improvement. You're just trying to be a better person. And I've heard that several times from non-Christians, and it looks different to me when it's from a Christian, because they don't literally say that. They do something else, in my opinion. But like outside, I'll say, no, it's about whether Jesus Christ is the Messiah and he died and rose again. It's not about me. It's about whether that's true, and then I respond to that truth. Because they actually do think, like, I don't need it. All religions are the same, because they're all about trying to be a good person, and you shouldn't, curtail someone trying to be a good person. And I was like, no, that's not the point. The point is, if Jesus, the Son of God, comes down and tells you something, does something, you need to respond to that thing if it's true. And that truth has consequences. And what he says has consequences. And then what is the true nature of human beings? So to me, it has nothing to do with like me trying to be a good person. It's me responding to the person who was ultimately the best. So.
And there I have a curious question that I would like kind of want to know. Like, when you say I'm a good person, like, okay, what do you mean by a good person? What is the definition of a good person? Just because you got good stuff. I mean, lots of people don't think they've done anything bad, and they've got lots of good stuff.
That warrants hell, right?
Or just
punishment, or
actually, I think a lot of people look at their lives and they can look at what they have and what they own and look at their comforts and go like, how could I be bad? I have all this good stuff in my life. And it's like, there's potential that you don't realize you may have gained a lot of that good stuff in a bad way and never realized it, because you're just aloof and unaware or whatever. But what is a good person is really the fundamental question to all the self-help stuff. Like any kind of self-improvement seeks to be a certain kind of thing. And in the ancient religions, at least they understood they were attempting to be virtuous, or they were attempting to be like the good, the God.
Yeah.
Which is funny that the word good in German is gut, which is good. And it's also Gott, which is, God is the same word as good. So we end up with like the word God
is good.
In English is the word good, just truncated. So when you say the word God, you're saying he's the good. And so it's this attachment that even in the English language has it together. But I don't think we always see that. We don't think of like, I'm going to be a godly person if I'm going to be a good person. Yeah, so that's how we would have put it together as Christians in the West.
And I would say there are a number of religions that kind of give you the appearance that if you can do certain things to become more pleasing to a deity or pleasing to society. The thing is you're doing it unto something. And is that the thing? What defines what's good is the question, and who defines it? And typically some people look within themselves to define what's good. Others look to society. So I preached a sermon and I called it a sinometer, where you put like Hitler at one end and you put like Mother Teresa or whoever you think the greatest person is. Everybody usually puts themselves in the middle. They never like say, well, I'm close to Hitler or I'm close to Mother Teresa. They're always like, well, I'm not as bad as this guy, but I'm better than this guy, but I can't say I'm the best because then that would be prideful. So I'm going to put myself slightly above the average.
And that's really fun to say. Now, where would you put your wife? Just kidding.
Yeah,
where would you put your son? Where would you put your boss?
I can't put myself too far on the good side, because then that would be prideful, which is bad, which would put me closer to Hitler.
Yeah. And I do think this is how human beings judge. They usually judge about what they see as good and perceived by what they've been around and their experiences, what they perceive from history, what they believe about religion or don't believe. And some people don't even question it. They just kind of accumulate this kind of idea. And it's like, the question is, where does that come from? This idea of even there is a good thing. And then who defines it? Because I do think that you don't have to feel it. It's not a feeling or a perception. It can be felt, but I do think what's important is to know that there are sincere people that sincerely do bad things. They didn't mean to, but they do them, right? And so it doesn't have anything to do with my internal feelings, whether I'm doing something good. There is some connection there, but it's not the reason why. So if it is the reason why, if people are like, I feel like I'm pretty good, the question isn't what you feel. The question is, how do you know that? And who defines what's good? And I think this has been argued throughout the centuries by different people. And religions do claim that they are claiming that we know what's good. They're saying like this is, so the idea that
you're on religious ground the second you use the terminology of good.
Yeah.
This is the bottom line. And as much as the secular society thinks, no, we don't need to do that. It's like, well, then how do you well, we all agree what the good is. And that falls apart really quickly when you have a society like the Nazis, or you have a society like, I'll be honest, if our society went over and hung out with Hindus, you'd be real fast. We'd be like, well, that's not good. Oh, is it? I mean, or is that just what their society has agreed to? And so now if we're going to intermingle, how do we decide that? And that's been the problem.
That's going on in the United States right now.
Right.
Yeah. You got two people. You got people on two different sides of issues all over the place, and they both think that they're good. You know? And
that's why we don't say anymore like, I disagree with you on your position. No, we got to say you're evil for your position. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. That we've now we're into religious talk. Our political positions are religiously held, not politically held, and that fits right into this sad idea of pragmatism and practicality. And pragmatism is an American concept that is so relativist, and it's purely American. It is an American concept. It came out of
American
Dewey,
creation,
and and we're the ones who hold it the strongest.
Yeah.
In fact, we have a tendency, even in churches, to kind of just say things like,
what's the point of this?
I don't need theology. Like, if it works, do it. You know, kind of, well, let's get out there and just do this stuff. Why are we talking about it all the time? And, it sure pushes us forward to get some things done, not to sit around and think about it, which is good. But the idea that you don't need to know why you do something is why a lot of churches have dropped theology classes, why they don't teach a lot of the different viewpoints of the faith anymore, because it's just like, well, we know what we need to go do. Let's just go do it. Just go preach the gospel. And we take something that's robust and we minimize it down to what's efficient and practical and that's that.
And economical.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure I brought it up on the podcast before, but you know, it's like, and I've had discussions with people who want to do good things to help people, and they're Christians, and I kind of give this pushback that just running out and doing good deeds for people isn't truly good unless it's followed up with the gospel. You know, I mean, it can be kind, but to me, to do something good and not present the gospel when you can is, you know, I mean, to be hyperbolic, you know, is evil, right? I mean, if I have the cure to cancer and I'm going to give you pills to make you feel good and not give you the cure, that's evil, you know? And so again, I think we get busy doing good things sometimes, and not we as Christians, but people, and think that if I just do a kind deed, then that's good in and of itself. And it's kind, but if you're withholding the gospel from them, I don't. What if
it's just one link in a chain for the gospel versus like, hey, I'm not. You know, you may not give the gospel right away, but you know that you did it in the name of Christ, and they know that you're a Christian, and you're doing it for that reason.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's a difference between the pitch, is what I call it,
right,
and just doing something in the name of the Lord. Going, hey, I'm a Christian. I just wanted to say, hey, I love you. Here's a blessing bag, and there's a number in there to help if you need it. And my church is up the street, so I just want to say that. And then you kind of drive away. That's better than here's a blessing bag.
You know,
right? But I was like, but it doesn't mean I said like the gospel, and I stopped the car and I start getting on my sandwich board and I'm like, you're going to hell. You know, that I have to, a lot of people feel like you have to give the pitch. And in our culture, there's a debate as to how effective that is as well.
Well, I'll say this. Let me just say this.
Pragmatic evangelists.
Yes.
And I'm not saying we shouldn't do kind deeds, but the illustration that you said years and years ago, to me, just has always resonated with me about the one-winged plane. You know, the group that thinks if we just go out and we do these good things for people, then that's preaching the gospel. You know, and the other side is if we just go out and we preach the gospel, we don't have to do good things. We just preach the gospel, and it's like, no. If you're just out there doing good things, then people think you're good, not God, it's not going to point them to God, and it's going to puff you up. And so you're stealing God's glory in a sense. And then if you are just speaking and not doing, well, James warns us about that. So it's like, who wants to get on a one-winged plane? No, we want both wings on that plane, and they have to be present. And I just always thought that was a really good illustration that's just stuck with me all the time. So,
and that's true. And I think, again, my point is, like, I'm trying to just nuance it a little bit so that people don't end up just going, well, I did a nice thing, now I have to yell at you with the gospel. Like,
no.
When we say the gospel, we don't mean that you have to hit the pitch. Did you know that Jesus Christ died on the cross for your sins and he rose from the dead? Do you believe that? Will you receive it right now? Would you bow your heads with me?
Yeah, kind of out of the blue too,
like,
especially.
It is like, it can be an invitation. It can be, I'm doing this because I love Jesus and I hope that you would. You can do it as a guide towards the gospel. Sometimes gospel presentations are pointing as much as they are preaching. And you look at, there's both cases throughout scriptures where there's, miracles are done and this thing has happened, and boom, you got to preach the gospel. This guy just got healed from something and he's standing in the temple. Yeah, you better start preaching. But you don't hear that, like, when the widows were served, that every time they served the widows in the church, they preached the gospel. No, it was filling the content of the gospel in, so that when the gospel was preached, the words had meaning. They'll look at these people who give of themselves. Oh, it's because Jesus gave. Oh, this. I see what they're saying. And that's what you want them to say. I see that you live what you're saying. Oh, now I see. Like,
yeah, but
that's why people say that when they come to an understanding. They go, I see, not, oh, I get it.
Yeah. I think of it as like go and make disciples. Part of making disciples isn't just telling them about the pitch. It's actually telling them something about God. Like, I love you, God loves you. That's why I'm here. I'm helping. So I want to start that relationship with somebody, at least seeing an aspect of who God is. The relationship with God, not necessarily with me, but it might be me. But I might only have 5 or 10 minutes to show God's love to somebody. So the point is, how do I show God's love to somebody right now in the moment that I have? And that might be like telling them, look, there's a track in here that talks about the Lord. If you have questions, I'm here. I don't have time to tell you, but unless you want to talk about it, but I just doing this because I care about you. And then that might be, but at least you're leading them in a direction that means I love you and the Lord loves you. And
I just feel that one of the easiest ways, especially if you have time constraints, but one of the easiest ways to make that gospel pitch, if you want to call it that, without, preaching at them or anything, is simply just asking them, how can I pray for you?
Yeah.
And so you are communicating to them that there is a God, he cares about them, you care about them, and this too is,
I think in our current culture, you have to be even more specific. You have to say, hey, I'm gonna leave here and talk to Jesus.
Yeah, you might have to do that.
You have to use Jesus, because God can be
anyone.
Right now anything, from the American
your higher
God,
power.
To your higher power, to Allah, to you name it. It's like, I was sitting at Panera and listening to some really excited lady talk, like aggressively talking about something. She's just like, I'll talk for the 7 minutes, but 4 of those minutes, spirituality is just like, you've got to have spirituality and you cannot. And then I'm like, oh, that's weird. And she starts talking about the church's like structures and stuff. And she's like, oh yeah, I guess I should assume it's, it's a one of those male-dominated culture.
The patriarchy.
It's a patriarchal group. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but it's got the feeling of the moon, not the sun. It's got more yin than it's got yang, and suddenly she's getting into all this like weird Eastern spiritual stuff. I'm like, who is this, and what church is she talking about? And this is just weird. She's starts quoting a Bible verse, but she's like at the same time talking about the powers, and I'm like going, yeah, this is the confusion we have in our culture. Because church has got practical and pragmatic and haven't honed in on what makes us Christian in so many ways. And that's the danger of some evangelical churches that have tried to be so seeker sensitive, so willing to bring the person in, that there's no boundaries, even to doing what God said. And yet what I was trying to basically say is, yeah, you can do these things and you can have good benefits, but don't think you're trying Christianity out. That's not Christianity. Like we can take all this stuff and turn it into principalized self-help if we want, but it's not going to give you anything but a bunch of laws. And those laws, as we've seen over and over throughout the scriptures, wind up causing people to be frustrated and incapable of living that vision out appropriately. And so
there's a couple conversations I've had with people here at the church that fall along the lines of a couple things. One of them is similar to what you're saying. They're coming in, they're feeling like, I just don't get it because I've tried to do these things that you've said to be a better person and to care for people, and it's not working for me. And so what do you say to someone like that? I know for me in the conversation, it was really about like, it is not about you being a better person. It's knowing that you're not good enough for God, surrendering to him and really believing that he died and rose again and that you have the Spirit to guide you. Without that, you're going to try to do it on your own, and you're kind of saying you're God. And that you know better because you're going to pick and choose what's good for you and going to try this and try that. And whatever you try, that's what you adopt. And that might not be true or good. And so it really does go back to that relational aspect with God. But I don't know what you would say to someone. The other person came up and they're looking for an existential, like not a practical thing, but like a spiritual encounter. Like they need to, I just don't feel it. You know, it's kind of like, I get it. Everybody else feels like they're feeling something. And I get that and I want that, but I don't get that. And I was like, yeah, to me, it's different. It's like, I look at C.S. Lewis, it was a dragging fight all the way to believe in God. He didn't want to change his life. He was frustrated, but he surrendered to the truth because it was true, not because he liked it or preferred it. He actually liked where he was in his life, and it was very difficult to change for him. So he describes it as painful. He didn't say like, oh, it was glorious. You know, later on, he has different experiences. So I say, really, it is about the truth. What is true? Is Christ really, Jesus Christ, is he really God? Did he really die and rose again? And what did he say? Believe that. What I mean by that is rely on that and practice those things. And hopefully your feelings will come at some point. They need to come at some point to be healthy, I think. But you need to obey God and believe that that's true. And I don't know if that means you have to feel something. So that's another thing I've heard a lot of, kind of a
that's
feeling.
That's an interesting thought, you know. Can you, and I do believe that there are spiritual conversions that are eventful. You know?
Sure.
Emotionally eventful, this awakening that takes place inside of you.
Old sins die away.
I can pinpoint the day and the moment that really happened to me. And again, I do agree to some point that it doesn't have to be an overly emotional experience or all of that. And I know that Ruth Graham, you know, she said, I don't remember the day I gave my life to the Lord. I just know one day I said yes. But
the sun was shining. I just know that the sun, I don't know when the sun came up, but I know the sun is shining. That was like always her kind of statement.
And so part of it is, you know, can you just come to a mental ascension of this is true, you know, and not have any sort of a reaction, right? And maybe I'm oversimplifying this, but I kind of look at it like, you know, almost a marriage, right? Where do you really love the person you marry if you just go, yeah, I think we're best off if we marry each other,
like
and
an
this is a very economic decision, and I know that it's true and right for us.
The vast majority
future.
Of marriages throughout the history of humanity,
throughout the history,
or the Bible,
and I get that, you know, and so again, if you never had an emotional attachment to them, do you really have a marriage in that sense? You know.
Yeah, a marriage is a commitment. It's not an emotional. It's not purely an emotional thing. I think it always becomes one, and the reason it becomes one is because it's a commitment to a person. So, for example, you believe some truths that don't get you all stirred up and like emotional. 1 + 1 = 2.
No, oh.
Right. Well,
no, I remember the day I figured that out. It was only a few years ago.
1 cookie
and
plus 2
pretty
cookie.
excited.
1 cookie plus 1 cookie = 2 cookie.
Oh, they're so good. Oh, I ate one. 1 cookie minus 1 cookie is 1 cookie.
Oh, I'm sad.
Plus 1 cookie is 2 cookies.
Thank you, Cookie Monster. All right.
It's an endless cycle till the box is empty.
Yeah. But obviously, I think when we're talking about like mental assent to a truth that is actually abstract, to like that is not even to truthful statements in the sense of like, the sky is blue. It's like, and when you're looking at it, you can have an existential experience looking at the sky.
Sure.
Ooh.
Sure. And see its beauty and have an experience of that. But that's very different than when you approach a relationship with God. I don't think that all relationships with God begin
We're talking about the beginning
from an emotional standpoint. Some people, I think they're more geared toward, I think God reaches you where you're at.
All right.
Some people are emotional and they have these emotional experiences with God. Some people are mental and they have these very mental experiences with God.
Why'd you look at me when you said mental?
You don't want me to answer that question. No, then there's the whole fact that there are people who have come to Christ because of their activity in something. It was like, it was just doing stuff, and it was like, obviously God's here. This is crazy, kind of thing. But I do think that people who are like, I just think there needs to be an emotional experience. I want to kind of go like, okay, well, let me ask you a question. When you approach God, do you approach him as an idea, or are you approaching him as a real person? Like, and then I want to get into like, what's your prayer life like? You're really praying for anything that God can answer? Are you really asking for anything? Is there a sense like, if God answers your prayer, there's going to be emotion. There's going to be this sudden like, whoa, God did this. And there's going to be like, okay, like there's a reality, there's an awakening that starts to occur. So I don't think that you're going to just stay like, you
don't stay there unless there's something problem.
In fact, I would say this is kind of one of the thoughts I was having about churches is that like we can almost break these up to where you feel like there's different denominations.
That's
right?
why there's different denominations, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's like practical churches, which is like all your
more feely churches,
evangelical churches that are very like solidly like we get out there and we do stuff. We're seeker sensitive and they're all practical. Boom, 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 and they're
5 steps to things.
Yeah, they may have good rock and music, but they don't really like. They're not out for like, hey, we want you to have this massive emotional experience. Not like a Pentecostal church where you're just like, you better be, if you're not jumping up and down, they're like, you don't have the Spirit, do you, brother? It's like,
you got to seek it out.
Something's missing. And then you go to like Reformed churches and it's like, no, what do you mean? We got like,
everything's very contemplative.
No, you must think through these things. It's like, so we've broken these up and it's kind of, I think it has to do with personality. I think it has to do with philosophies.
We also think that people who are mental are not having emotional states because that's the way they choose to present themselves. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's true. I do think that when I talk to my contemplative Christians, there's a lot of emotions. It's just not expressive. But they do have them. They're there if you know where to look for them.
Yeah, they're not neurotic.
You can push their buttons and
in the ocean test.
Yeah. And I would say that the same thing is whatever you are doing in a Pentecostal service, seeking an encounter, doesn't mean that you're not thinking about what's going on also. And so I'm just saying that like there's this requirement that people think you need that everything has to happen or have a misconception about what happens when you first meet God. And it's the same to me, kind of like a sibling. Like, I know some people, when my sister came home, I was totally happy. You could see I was happy to have a sister. Now, I've seen other kids go, not so happy.
Yeah.
They go, no, this is your brother. And you're like, I kind of liked being a lonely child, and you brought this thing into the house. And now after a while, though, of going, no, we're going to stay loyal to each other. We're going to learn. And then all of a sudden, they're like, okay, kind of like them now. You know what I mean? And okay, we've been through some experiences, and that's what I'm saying about God. I'm saying, right, if you are the person who's struggling, you are already in some kind of a relationship. Like a friend that was like, you keep hanging out with that girl. Are you dating? They're like, no. It's like, well, do you hang out a lot? Yeah. Do you think about them a lot? Yeah. Are you contemplating whether they're important to you in your life? Yeah. Okay. I hate to tell this to you, but you're dating. You know what I mean? Like it's so at some point, if you're putting a lot of energy into this thing, you are having a commitment with it. You should just formalize that commitment and go, you know what, I'm going to seek this out and I'm going to, and then see if your emotions don't change. And for those who are emotional, it's the similar experience. It's like, you had this emotional experience. What happened? And people come to the altar 6, 7, 8 times looking for the experience. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, you got to stop. You got to figure out what happened to you. What did God do to you? What does it mean to be saved? What does the Bible say? What is the doctrine of salvation? You need to learn those things and stop looking for the experience because you think that's what it is. So I'm just saying, like, there's all these in their, not pragmatic, but they're just kind of like ways they think they encounter God on a practical level, or however they do it in their life. They're kind of sometimes misconceptions. It's all based on whether something is true. If God is really someone that you need to get to know, I think engaging in that with some loyalty and sincerity, and if you believe that he actually died and rose again, that if act on that belief, turn your affections as much as you can in that direction, and have thoughts about who he is and learn about what he is. That is what it means to be a Christian, and the profession of that comes.
So this goes back to the question of pragmatism. So are we versus emotionalism, like versus contemplation? Like, say somebody is coming to Christ, and they, some people are like, okay, do something, it's like, and so it's like, okay, well, I'm going to get baptized. I'm going to confess.
Walk up the altar.
I'm going to confess that I believe that Jesus is the Christ, Son of the living God. I'm going to walk to the front. I'm going to get baptized. So there's this doing something. But I do think that at the beginning, there needs to be at some point, like, a reckoning with sin. Like, people who I've met who have given their life to Jesus, quote unquote, but have never stopped and really felt the guilt and the heaviness of having sinned against God, there I kind of go like, well, why do you not feel that? Why do you not like it? Now, either if you're like Wood, what's his name?
James, you're talking about Wood, David Wood. Sorry.
David Wood, and obviously he can't feel that guilt. He has to.
That's why I brought the conversation.
He literally has to assent.
David
to
Wood is
the
a
truth.
Sociopath who gave his life to the Lord, and is a practicing Christian and doesn't have a lot of feeling, or empathy, because of the condition that he has.
And so that barring conditions, barring those kinds of things, I think the average normal person should at some level have some sense of remorse, guilt, some sense of like
obligation towards what happened.
I have done something wrong. Now, some people are going to cry. Some people are just going to be like kind of stunned and like repent right there. Other people are going to, I think this is why the crisis moment concept is so difficult, because we almost want to wait for somebody to have the crisis before they can give their life to the Lord. Like, they got to hit rock bottom. And it's like, that gets right into that. Well, what about the practical person who's like, well, I'm good? That doesn't mean you're right with God. Like, that doesn't mean that you may have a good life, but you're going to lose it because you're not good enough to keep the good life that he's given you. Have you thanked him for the good life he's given you?
Yeah.
Do you know the source of that good life? That's really the direction we have to start going, because we live in such a wealthy place. If somebody gave you all this stuff and you ignored them from that point on, I mean, that would be
And who would you be once it was all gone? Are you only as good as the stuff that you have? Mm-hmm. So me, it's kind of a weird thing to be like, I'm good because I'm good enough because of what I have. Well, what you have could be a total blessing. Other people don't have that. Doesn't make them less good.
In fact, if you really look into it, so much of what people have
usually
is serendipitous in many ways, because of where they grew up, the state of the job they randomly landed,
their health.
Yeah, they got this. They were put in that school they never chose. There's a lot of aspects to your position in life based on your background, your history,
or providence.
Just pure providence.
And that was kind of one of the discussions I had with my dad, too, was he was looking at his life, and great marriage. He had good kids and good family and, had everything he wanted, and just was like, I'm living a good life. What do I need God for? And part of me was like, and from a pragmatic standpoint, you're living a good life because you are kind of living out the principles of God, right? You're a moral guy. You never cheated on your wife. You treat her well. That's why you have a good marriage, is because you are taking these biblical ideals and you're implementing them, even though you don't know that you're doing that. And you've been good to your kids. And so, again, you're kind of reaping the benefits of a Christian life without living a Christian life. And I know that's wrong to say that. But again, it's kind of like if you're a law-abiding citizen and you live at peace with everybody and you're not then you're going to possibly lead a peaceful life in the culture. You're not going to be looking over your shoulders and stuff. So, there is that pragmatic side, but but again, I think that so people could look at that and go, see, you're living a good life even though you don't have God. But here's the problem is to really live a good life, and even in marriage and everything else, there's a lot of self-denial going on. There's a lot of self-sacrifice. There are not doing the things that you want to do, or, fulfilling every desire you have. And so some people would go, well, then that's not a good life. I want to do whatever I want, So and then they do everything they want, and they lead a miserable life.
And so there's really our faith has a position for this. It's called it's that general common grace. It's found right here in Romans chapter 2. After he's just told the Jewish people, like, listen, you're going to have all this, you're going to be judged too. Who are you guys to judge these Gentiles and not turn the law on yourself? He literally, verse 11 starts off, God shows no partiality, for all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law, and all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. So on Judgment Day, guess what? He's not going to whip out the Old Testament and judge the Gentiles with the Old Testament. He's just not going to do that. Instead, he's going to do something else. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. For when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. So here, as these guys are living out these principles, they're living out the things the law says, they'll be judged for those things, their own internal principles and law. And so, how many times have we violated our own personal codes and ethics? That's what you're going to get judged by, and that's critical, especially when we're talking to non-Christians. It's like, have you ever violated your own rules? Well, that's what God's going to judge you for. Like, you think, oh, I would never do this and this. Well, have you ever done that? Well, of course, but why'd you give yourself an excuse? Like, when you put it in those terms, nobody's perfectly consistent. But this is this idea that you can see good in people because it's written on our hearts, and sometimes we obey that. And yeah, there's going to be benefits. You're going to have that blessing, that good life, because when the machine runs appropriately in its design, even when it's not acting right all the time, sometimes it does, it works better. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's the idea. God set the world up in such a way that when you live in reality, you're going to live better than if you didn't. So, yeah.
And I will say that, in judgment time, not only is God going to judge you, and the Holy Spirit will be present, but you will be your own witness as well. And, and you will witness that you broke what you held dear. Mm-hmm. So, so your own conscience will be a witness against you as well. So, and again, I think when we're talking about emotions and pragmatism and intellect, again, when it comes to being a Christian, one of the things I've heard people say at times is, I've tried Christianity and it didn't work. So do you feel like that's? I mean, I don't feel like it's strictly a pragmatic comment, because I think sometimes people are, maybe you're in the throes of addiction, or your marriage is falling apart, and then you come to the Lord and give your life to the Lord, and the whole impetus of that is that he's going to fix your situation. And so you still fall into, the throes of addiction, or your marriage is still on the path of divorce, and therefore I tried it, it didn't work. Or you jump in there and, you're dealing with these things and hoping that God is going to change you, take those bad desires away. And so, or you yearn for the past, and therefore Christianity didn't work because I still want to do these things and I'm going to do them, and you walk away from the faith. Do you think that is more on the pragmatic side, or do you?
I think that there's a tendency to say, I tried. When you use the word try, you're still on the works side of the coin. I tried Christianity, it didn't work. That's not how Christianity works in the first place.
I tried it on, it didn't fit.
Right. It's not something you try. It's literally, how do you try something that's been done for you? I tried digging that hole and it didn't work. Well, the hole's already dug. Why are you trying to dig another hole? Like, that's kind of silly. What are you doing? That's not, or there's a bunch of weird little illustrations. Like, I'm thinking of like an electric bike. They're all the rage right now. A friend of mine down the street had one. He's like, try it. It's really fun. It's like, but these bikes are heavy. They're like 55 pounds. So you just start pedaling and you're like, oh my gosh, it's still got all the gears a normal bike would have, but they're heavy because they got these batteries. And so you're trying to go up a hill and you're just like, and it's like, oh, then just press this. Something like, it's like your feet are going, you fly up that like with no effort. And you're like, okay, that's ridiculous.
That's cheating.
But that's what you're thinking. You're thinking, I tried this electric bike and it didn't work. Did you press the button that gives the power to enable you to go? No, I was going to ride it myself. I heard these things are amazing. And it's like, that's kind of silly. Like, why would you go with
I use the electric bike. I use the electric part all the time, and I'm not losing weight and getting in shape.
Yeah. But even the fact that you have to press the button and make the electric part turn on. Otherwise, it's all under your own power and your own steam. You're not going anywhere. And then you complain that the bike doesn't work. Did you actually allow the bike to do what that is designed to do, to give the power that, well, no, I wanted to do it myself. Then don't buy an electric. You're not in the right space. There's other religions you can go try if you want to do it yourself. But you're gonna get just as frustrated. That's probably the best illustration I could think of.
I had 10-speed and a 40-pound backpack.
That's like a fire in a house to me. Like you've done usually people are asking that because their house is on fire. You know what I mean? They're not doing it when everything's cool. And it's like, yeah, you know what? Everything's great. I'm going to try out this Christianity. It's usually like, I'm in crisis and I need to make my crisis not bad. And so I'm going to grab a fire extinguisher of God and put out the fire. Like, you don't know how big a fire you started. You know what I mean? And now you want to use the principles of not starting a fire. So to me, it's kind of like, first off, you have to submit to the fact that you probably didn't make the best choices in your life and that you're probably not the best God. And so you can't make yourself the center of God, or you want God to go, come back here and make me God again. It's like you're asking God to make you God again. Well, that's how you got in the situation that you're in. And I think some people don't realize what their situation is, that when you take ownership of your own life and do whatever you want to do, and it doesn't go well for you, and then you ask God to bail you out, that might not be a good thing. You may need to feel the thing that you're going through is not good for you in order for you to stop doing that thing over and over again. And so sometimes God will, in his grace, help you out. But it's hopefully to get you to see that you got yourself in a bad situation. Now, I put the fire out for you. Don't do those things. I don't want to have to keep coming back. And after a while, your house is just going to burn down because you don't know how to cook. You don't know how to live. You don't know. You need someone to teach you how to do the things that don't require you to start your house on fire. You have to go back and do the things your parents should have taught you. But a lot of times, the only person that can really teach you that would be God. He needs to say, like, you need to surrender what you're doing to me. And if I don't become your God, then fixing your problems for you isn't going to go well for you.
Right. In the scriptures, the way that this is laid out, and I didn't go further into Romans chapter 8, but he really starts to get into how this process works. And it's always this, because it's odd, because it's using this term flesh versus the spirit. And I think if you were to just stop and go like, relay, you use the word sinful nature or whatever at times, I would say put it in the terms of your old habits and power.
Yeah, your old habits, power, desires.
Your old habits and power. Like your flesh is literally your old way of living, your old your power, doing it yourself in your old ways. So and the spirit is doing it,
helping yourself,
is doing
self-help,
is God's ways with God's power, right? So if you read it in those terms, you go like, for those who live according to their old ways and their old power, set their minds on those things that they used to do in their old ways and old power. But those who live according to God's power or God's ways and the Spirit's power, set their minds on those things that this God's power, God and the Spirit's, or God's ability and the Spirit's power. To set the mind on your old ways is death, but to set your mind on the things of the Spirit, on the Spirit, is life and peace. So you got these two modes of living. If you want to do it in your old power and your old ways, you're going to end up dead. You're just going to go right back to where you were. Your relationships are going to fall apart. Your life's going to fall apart, because the Spirit is there to give you a new way, a new direction. And so we are in a competition all the time where our old patterns, our old habits, our old stuff is coming in. And this is why you have to start with the renewal of the mind. You have to start with a transformation of the habits and the ways in trust in the Lord, letting His truth. This is why I'm not one of those people that's just like, well, the Spirit of God's in me, and He's going to teach me. No, you have to know the truths because they're changing your mind. Like, if you're a whimsical person in your flesh, you better not be a whimsical person in the Spirit, because you'll get taken. No, you've got to allow your mind to be changed into truths and the lies to be taken out.
It takes time
truths.
too.
Yeah, and this is not it's instant, because the instant part is now you can change. That's what changed. Before you couldn't. You were unable. There was nothing but yourself. There's nothing but your things. This is what I'm like. This is why the self-help is a joke to me, because it's a bunch of people who are helping themselves, and they found a little principle or something. They're like, you can do it too. And you're like, well, all we're doing is passing each other's fleshly concepts around and building new flesh patterns that are just not going to get us as far as we think they should.
And I will say most self-help, are not, I don't know if it's most, but a lot of self-help is goal-oriented. Do these things, and this is what you'll achieve.
Well,
and
a lot of them are changing too, like change your identity first. Yeah. Like they're telling you now, like, believe you're a different person. Yeah, it's name it and claim it. It's really crazy. Yeah. It's really funny.
Yeah. Secular name it and claim it.
And I think that some people approach Christianity with that goal as well, as, heal my marriage, falling apart. And one of the first questions I always ask somebody when I'm talking to them about that is, okay, they're motivated. They want to give their lives to Christ and be a better person in Christ. And I'm like, okay, but if God doesn't fix your marriage, are you still motivated to follow Christ? Is this goal oriented, just so that you can get over this crisis and then relax? Or if God doesn't heal your marriage and you end up in divorce, are you still going to passionately follow Christ? Is this really about your desire to follow Christ, or is this your desire, God. And again, in weight loss, we do this too. We're motivated. I want to lose 20 pounds before summer. And then you hit that goal of 20 pounds. And it's like, great, summer's here. Now I can eat whatever I want. Yeah. And it's really, no, it's about allowing the transformed life. It's not a diet, it is changing your lifestyle. And it's like, okay, yeah, change my lifestyle until I lose that 20 pounds, and it's...
So, but I think it's even more sinister than that, because we like to use things like, I actually think self-help can help you with things like your leadership, things like your weight loss, stuff like that, because to be quite honest, those are controllable factors in certain levels.
There's some common grace to the principles.
Yeah, but when you tell me that you're going to use your relationship with God to fix your relationship, like, first of all, you just said you're going to use a person. I'm going to use a person
to get what I want.
That is not Christianity.
Yeah, but I will say though, in those conversations, I do believe they don't believe they're doing that.
Yep. No, but I mean, I do believe that spoiled kids don't keep going to their parents and asking for things just because they actually think they love their parents. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't make their actions of taking advantage of their parents any less hurtful and painful to me. I've just seen very spoiled, wealthy kids wreck a car and have their parents buy them a new one. Because my parents, don't you love me? Yeah. And they think that's a part of the requirement to be loved, is that you do what I want you to enable do. My bad behavior. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying. It's like you're demanding of the all-loving and powerful God to be your Santa Claus every time you make a mistake. Well, you ask him to bail you out of jail or get out of jail.
And I think this is personal for me, because it's something that I've been working a lot on in my own heart, is how often do I use people or use scenarios to make myself feel better versus... Like, okay, I'm preaching a sermon. Sometimes you can preach a sermon, and I'm preaching a sermon not to give and to bless people. And no, I'm using it to get like significance, or to make myself
feel like you did a good job.
Right. And you can tell the difference when I either come off the stage and I'm asking my wife, like, how'd that go? Did you think that went well? Or like, versus like, what was the Lord teaching you in that? Or like, this is what this hit me in my sermon today. Whatever. There's a different orientation. And I find in a lot of marriages that I've found that are falling apart, they're using each other. A lot of marriages aren't in there to give to one another. Somewhere in there, they've started going like, well, they never give back to me, and so I deserve to da-da-da. And so suddenly it's this usury, because this is how we teach love. Everything in our romantic love is about take. And when I stop feeling the feels from you, then I fell out of love. And it's like, wait, that's a very selfish oriented thing. And so then you go to God because I need to have the feels from God now. So you can fix my marriage, because I can't, if I give you the feels, God, you'll give me the fix, like, I don't care whether they think they're relating rightly or not to God. They're using a person.
You're using a
and
person.
I don't think I think that's very much what Jesus was getting at when he said, I don't care what you did in my name. Do you know me? This is not about your relationship with your spouse or the stuff you've got or who you're sitting around at a table. This is about, do we have a relationship, a long-lasting, true relationship with God, regardless of circumstances?
And we just want to make a point to the listeners and the watchers of this podcast is we're not using you to make ourselves feel better. But if you want to send in comments about how much you enjoy us and who's your favorite, you can do that at rabbittrail@obcc.church. Okay, so one of the other things that came up question-wise,
somebody out there is going to make a comment that was true. Yeah. And then we're going to read it.
I said, you said that the relationship is to change us. Our relationship with God is to change us.
No, that's what empowers the change. That's what I said.
And many people have a relationship with God, but they don't seem to change. What do you think is going on there? So, for me, just to start it off and see what you think, I do think that people are Christian by name, and
nominal.
They receive Christ by name and not truly receive Christ, because I do not believe that you can have a relationship with someone and it not change you. You're single, you get married, you change as a person from me to we, and in so many different areas. My personal goals are now common goals between the two of us. It changed, marriage changed my desires for life as well. So I don't think you can enter into a relationship with God and it not change you. I think that's a fundamental truth. I do think, though, that sometimes it may seem that there's not change going on because it is taking root and there's maturity coming into it. But, if you're looking at somebody 20 years down the road and they're still living the same life that they lived before they found Christ, I would question the legitimacy of the relationship with
What was the last part of the question that you said, though?
The question said, that Greg said the relationship with God changes us. Many people have a relationship with God, but they don't seem to change. What do you think is going on?
At that point, I like to sit down with someone and have a conversation with them, because oftentimes I want to look through, what does their relationship with God look like? Because to me, it's like people go, I just don't feel God. I go, are you praying? Are you reading? Are you going to church? Are you connecting with people that are more mature? Are you opening up and honest to people around you? Are you confessing your sins? Because I often feel like one of those areas is like completely lacking. And it's not that these things are necessarily works. It's just in any relationship, you want to know what the health of the relationship is. Do you communicate? Do you understand the other person actually? Do you understand what you're doing in response? And do you care enough? Do you spend time thinking about them? Do you feel about their well-being? Do you care what they think about? Those are the same kind of questions that you ask when you ask about what I call spiritual disciplines. What do they look like? Where does your time go? Where do you spend your time? How much time have you actually contemplated what it is that you believe? And is it the number one thing in your life? Do you center your life really around this relationship? If God is true, everything else is second. And you have to kind of evaluate that no matter how strong or a Christian you are, because from time to time, things drift in and out of your life that try to compete for God's affections. And you got to make sure he's number one. So
I think that when I would answer that, there's two parts. That I'm talking mainly to people who really are Christians, like they've seen change, but there's times where you're just like,
you're in the valley.
I picked this, I'm doing the scripture, and just, I thought I was changing. I found myself back in an old sin, or I found myself regressing at some level. And it's like, wait a minute. And remember, there's a focus on the spirit and a focus on the flesh. There are times where you're going to go backwards because you've been living out of old habits and old patterns. And you don't even realize it because guess what? Old habits and old patterns are just...
They die hard.
Yeah. You're like a fish in water. You don't even realize you're in it, right? Kind of thing. And what we want to do is remember, like, I like a couple things, is the note that sanctification is not a straight line and it's not an instantaneous line. And the best, and I know this is kind of semi-allegorical, but it's just the ancients used to use this, and I've heard it in sermons and stuff, and it just really resonates, is that God told the Israelites, like, you're going to go into Canaan, and you're going to take out in the land of Canaan all these other groups, but I'm not going to remove them all immediately. I'm going to remove them bit by bit so that you get established, and then all the wild animals are going to take you over, and there's just not this open, barren land. No, I'm going to establish you, and then bit by bit you're going to remove these things. And so if you're like me, where you've moved forward on things, don't lose focus. I think there's a sense in our current culture why we don't see a lot of dramatic change is because we are a scatterbrained group of people. We think change needs to happen immediately. There's very few things that take long time.
Long-term investment is not a big thing for a priority for a pragmatic
and so we
group
think,
of people.
Man, I gave my life to Jesus. This should change immediately. I should have these desires gone. Like, I've prayed many, many times that God would remove my same-sex desire or my desire to sleep with my girlfriend or to whatever, to desire this food or this candy or this, you name it. He's never taken it away. And it's like, okay, well, maybe he's establishing something else first. If he took that away, maybe something worse would show up. And I think that's the idea in that text is like, I'm not gonna remove all the sin. Like, God's so gentle with us. If he dumped the truck of sin out on us, of all of our sin, I don't think we would be able to move. I don't think there would be change. I think we would just be like, well, this is ridiculous. I'm out. Like, I can't handle this. And it's like, sometimes sometimes it gives a grace and boom, there's an immediate change. And you never go back to that. But you'll find oftentimes those people end up not continuing to grow significantly spiritually because they think the next one's supposed to be a miracle too. And the next one's, and it's like, no, not all change.
Hard work.
Is miracles. And some people aren't walking long enough in the same direction for the miracle to break through. In sanctification classes that I took, they talk about the ups and downs, and then there's these leaps that occur. And throughout the church history, they've talked about your slow crawl and then boom, a breakthrough. Sometimes they call it the second filling of the Spirit. Sometimes they call it, the baptism of the Holy Spirit. But all of these people, oftentimes when they get there, have had this long, arduous journey with a breakthrough. And you keep going. There's several times this can occur where suddenly, because what God's doing is, and I like that illustration, sometimes it's like a tree planted by the streams of water, right? You don't, in the winter, when the leaves are gone, you think, oh, this tree's dead. No, it's building root systems, right? It doesn't look strong, but it's getting stronger. And so that when the wind blows, it's not going to be knocked over. And so you have to stop and say, look, it may not look like things are changing at this moment, but that doesn't mean that God's not working on some aspect of your soul, some aspect of your heart, pushing you in a new direction. But I don't want us to get into this instantaneous kind of mentality. It's going to disappoint you because no relationship, when you're working like that, is always going to be instantaneous. He may grant that to you at a time, but just keep in the relationship and God will, and keep obeying. That's the other thing. I think a lot of people think you don't keep growing because there's some point where God asks you to do something that's really going to test your faith and you don't step out, and you're going to be stuck right there for a long, long time because he's just going to wait for you to come join him in what he's doing. And so there's some different reasons why I think that happens, but it's all relationship based.
And I do think too, sometimes change isn't super obvious. And so, although the scriptures talk about, if you put your hand to the plow, don't look back, or you're not fit for the kingdom. And I do think that means don't look back at your old life with longing. But sometimes I think sometimes it's good, whatever, change is going on in your life, to look back at where you were a year ago, look back at where you were 6 months ago. And a lot of times you can really start to see progress in your life that you don't see on a day-to-day basis. So, this is more probably true again I'm on a weight loss kick today, but, if you're dropping 15, 20 pounds, nobody's saying nothing. And then all of a sudden, everybody is pointing out that you look like you're losing weight. And
are you sick? Is everything okay?
Yeah. So again, sometimes changes are happening and then they become obvious. So, all right. We, unless you guys have anything you want to hit, and we'll get on to the questions.
Oh, we got questions?
Oh, we got some questions. Okay, so Shatera, question about the Last Supper, communion, Eucharist. She says, it's taught in the Roman Catholic Church that Christ has given himself body, blood, soul, and divinity, and it is truly present in the Eucharist at every single Mass. And then she gives some references for the Catholic Church to support that, or some verses in Scripture. One of them being John 6:55 and 56. For my flesh is true food, my blood is true drink. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me and I in him. And basically stating that it gives you life. In the next few verses, Jesus sees many of his disciples having difficult time understanding this teaching and asked if they took offense to it. And Jesus said, it's the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken are spirit and life. So she purchases the Catholic Catechism. She's been going through that because this thing, and she sent us a video clip of a priest on YouTube who was talking about it. And he interprets that flesh statement to mean that the flesh is no help at all. But when it's talking about the Eucharist, Jesus is saying my flesh, not the flesh. And so again, he is pretty dogmatic that that when the Eucharist is given at every single Mass, that it is the body and it is the blood of Christ. What say you? Okay.
Good. You got to go watch the whole thing. And
I watched the video, and a couple of things that stuck out to me. One of the things he said is the Eucharist is God's very presence, and it is God's presence in this world. And Jesus said, this is my body, and truly became his body. It truly becomes his body. In John 6, if you want to live forever, eat my body, eat my flesh, that type of stuff. And one of the things he said at the end that kind of troubled me a little bit, he said, the flesh is the hinge of salvation, given up on the cross and at the Last Supper and at every Mass, and that is what saves us. So he really was saying that the Eucharist and communion is part of our salvation, and we must eat the flesh of Christ and drink his blood literally, and it's present in every Mass. And so part of my pushback on that too is, obviously as Protestants, we don't believe that. But if he really does, if they really do believe, the Catholics believe that this is God's presence and it is salvific for you to take it, then why exclude everybody that's a believer of God and Jesus Christ except for Catholics?
Why say that again?
My understanding is you can't take communion at a Catholic church unless you are Catholic, right? So if you believe and you've professed your faith in Jesus Christ and God the Father, and then they exclude you from the only thing that can save you on this earth, that I find difficult.
That would mean the Catholic Church would be the only people that could offer salvation truly.
Well, and that's what they believe.
On paper.
The priests are endowed with a special dispensation from God to actually transform the bread.
This is also similar to the Orthodox in the idea of sacraments, not necessarily in transubstantiation, but.
So yeah, in the Catholic Church, from how I understood it, is that they've been endowed with a special dispensation at a certain level of your priesthood to actually transform the blood or transform to the blood and the flesh. As it pertains to John 6, first and foremost, I think it's this is where we get into this like literalism that is kind of interesting, because he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you." And yeah, what's crazy about this is they all think he's being serious. Like they all think he's legitimately like saying, eat
in the text,
in the text, eat my body and drink my blood. Yet what he's indicating is that this is far more about, hey, you want to know what real food is? It's participation with me. Like later in the book of John, he's going to say, trust me, the Father is in me and I am in him. So does that mean they ate each other? Like, is that what we mean by in? Like, but here it says, well, you need to eat of this food. So he's using a food analogy. He's using the bread that came down from heaven. So he's connecting it to the manna, which was a sustenance for life. And what we see here is that this is this sustenance response, that it's about, you want to know how to have real sustenance, real life, then this is what you should do. You need to participate with me. Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. I'll raise him up on the last day. The interesting thing is that he says that my flesh is true food, the blood is true drink. Whoever feeds on my flesh, drinks blood, abides in me and I in him. Then he switches over to this bread stuff, but he doesn't use the wine in the section. Doesn't use a cup in this section. He doesn't indicate what that it would be tied to the communion in here
later
either.
On in Passover.
Yeah. Instead, he doesn't even tie it to Passover. He ties it to the manna coming down from heaven,
the Old Testament,
which was a daily dependence you had to have from God to be able to live. Now that would mean the Eucharist should be offered you should have to take it every daily, single day. And gone out and received doubly on Friday before Saturday.
This should mimic the manna.
I know Catholic churches used to be open; people can wander in every single day and pray and stuff. Was the Eucharist available at all during those?
I don't know enough about
it. It has to be. It's only
just come in, pray, light a candle type
you
thing.
You can't. They don't have it. It has to be dispensed by a priest. So.
But yeah,
go. I mean, then the whole problem that I have traditionally, and this is theologically, is that it breaks their own theology. There is a theological council called the Council of Chalcedon, or Chalcedon, however you want to say it, and they were trying to figure out how is Christ both fully God and fully man. So they came up with this argumentation that's called the Chalcedonian box. He is 100% God, he's 100% man, and neither can you mix his divinity and his manhood, nor separate them. And this is exactly what this kind of language does when you claim that the body and the blood of Christ literally is the body and blood of Christ, and that this is sacrifice. Well, first of all, then you're claiming you just took the resurrected Jesus, chopped him into pieces, and sent him all over the world. And that's not what they really mean. But then now Jesus' humanity is in multiple places at the same time. As a living life force, but that's not what a human being is. That's not the nature of humanity. And so that's actually the nature of a spirit, to be in multiple places at the same time. And so if Jesus is fully God and fully man, you can't violate the fully man side. And that's what the reformers, especially Calvin, would argue to Luther, and Zwingli would argue. They would both go like the Presbyterian side of the reformers would say, no, dude, you're destroying the very humanity of Jesus when you guys are claiming that he's being cut up or he's dying every single time, which we're like, no, Hebrews says he died once and for all. You can't have an ongoing sacrifice. It's a once for all sacrifice done by Jesus. That's what the book of Hebrews argues.
Yeah.
And so these two things led the reformers to go, it cannot be that this is actually it.
The physical manifestation. Now, Luther is like, oh, well, it's underneath and it's, but because
he still had the same problem.
They legitimately believe in the Catholic Church that miraculously that the actual substance of Christ is imbued inside of the actual material of the bread and the wine. In other words, it looks like bread and it tastes like wine and it looks like wine, but actually it is physically the body of Christ. And so it appears on the outside as bread, but when it's been sanctified, and then it is actually the blood and body of Christ, because they take this verse to be incredibly literal. But the problem is like, why would you stop there? There are many other verses you could take literal when Jesus talks about himself. And literally he says, but the temple has been spoken of. And he goes, the temple, if I die, I'm going to raise up this temple in 3 days. And later it tells you he's talking about himself. Well, that doesn't mean Jesus on the outside looks like a man, on the inside is made of brick. If you're using this same kind of literalism, it has to be consistent throughout the text. And typically they wouldn't have thought of that. The disciples, it even tells you that Jesus was talking about, when he's talking about the temple, Jesus answered, destroy the temple and I'll raise it again in 3 days. They replied, it's taken 46 years to build this temple and you're going to raise it in 3 days. But the temple he had spoken of was his body. So does that, if you're going with transubstantiation and it literally turns in, is he there saying, I'm the temple? Is he now on the inside brick, but on the outside look like like a human? So this is the problem.
Not to mention, it says that we are his body. And so now does that literally mean we've transformed into the body of Christ?
Clearly, they even interpret this for you. They said he was talking about his body. They would have understood this as a symbology. He's saying, like, literally, the new temple is going to be built off of me. And it's a spiritual temple and it involves people, not bricks. But if you go with that interpretation that you have to take this literally, you literally have to think that on the inside, God's substance is brick. And that sounds ridiculous, but that's exactly what you're doing in the other text when he's talking about manna and he's relating back to the symbology of God providing something from heaven that gives continued substance. Jesus does this throughout his whole, I'm living water. Does that mean he's made of just pure water? And so you can't take one thing literal and another thing figurative without having some kind of reason for doing that, other than the priests say so or others say so. And what I don't like about some of the traditional faiths is they don't allow you to have a difference of opinion. This is the established dogma when it comes to the Catholic Church, because this is something that has to do with sacraments. Other things you can can believe different things, but not on this. This is something you can't question.
So like 1 Corinthians 12:27, same construction. Now you, Corinthians, are the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And individually members of it. Nobody's sitting there going like, no, legitimately, you are the physical body of Christ.
The spiritual meaning of it.
They know that this is a concept of allegiance. The idea of that, it's symbolic, but there is a power involved in this.
Sure.
There is a I would say a presence in some sense, but it's not the presence that would break up. It's the presence, the fact that we're the body of Christ. With what does that mean? It means that His Spirit is dwelling in us, and this is where Calvin would argue that what makes communion powerful, what makes communion efficacious to your faith, meaning it grows your faith, and so why they call a sacrament still and not an ordinance, like as we Baptists would call it, an ordinance. And I kind of have some care for this position, is that it grows your faith because you bring your faith to it, and when you interact with the Lord there, it actually develops your fidelity to Jesus as you remember who He is, and you confess sin as you work with Him, and you go through this memory and remembrance, and you're participating in a covenant. It is a covenant expression. It's a covenant symbology. Just like we would never assume that every time they killed the Passover lamb, they were practicing a covenant symbology. They weren't recutting the covenant every single time they killed the Passover lamb. They were remembering the covenant, and so this is the difference. Like, we do it in remembrance of the cut covenant. We're not doing it to solidify or to create the covenant anew. And that would be what would happen if you're sacrificing Christ every single time. You're creating the covenant anew every single time.
Yeah, they would say they're not doing that, but that is kind of what we think they're doing. And then so it's a difference. So they would say, like, no, they're just adding to what's already happened in the past.
But we don't need to add to it.
That's the problem for us, is the Bible's very clear that God died once.
Right.
And that was the atonement for once. He doesn't have to continue to
once
do it.
For all.
For all, yeah. So if the act that you're actually having to participate over and over and over and over again, to us, looks like it disavows that verse. So it says that God died once for all. And they would say, no, we're just continuing to practice that because this is a part of that dying.
And this is that Hebrews 7:27. He had no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, for he did this once for all when he offered up himself.
Yeah.
Like, it legitimately is telling you, you don't need daily, you don't need
priests.
You don't need any of this. He's done it. It's once for all finished. And this is one of those passages that, to me, is like very, very important. He says, Hebrews 9:26, but as it is, he has appeared once for all at the end of the ages to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And by that, Hebrews 10:10, and by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. So that term in this shows up over and over, always associated to the work of Jesus being done once for everybody. So.
And
There's always times like this where I got a joke in my head and I go, it just wouldn't be appropriate.
I would say that, like, there are various different positions, within the Protestant faith as to what happens at the time of communion. What does it do for the edification of the body of Christ? And so there's some various differences. I don't know. You find them extremely different? I don't find them maybe
between Lutheranism and then... yeah, I think that when you get into real ordinance conversations, it is just a symbol. There is nothing going on. It's like almost, it's very clearly like, we're not holding to magic here. There's no magic stuff. But what I like about Presbyterian position a little bit more is that it acknowledges the spiritual reality that's within us, with our faith. There is a connection that's happening with God that's true and real, but it's not. And there is something special about that time as we were remembering the very covenant that's been given to us, which is it's a very full body experience. So
yeah, because there's a Lutheran experience was closer to the Catholic experience and some other
Catholic light.
Yeah, and then later on you have Zwingli, who's saying like it's just all symbols, which I think a lot of our church has adopted. Calvin's kind of like, no, I don't believe that anything happens to the actual bread and body as far as like it manifesting the actual physical nature. None of them would say
what happens is with you.
Yeah, but there is something spiritually unique about. It's not just a symbol.
And then the Eastern Orthodox say, it's a mystery.
It's a mystery, but it is actually the body and blood of God, but we call it a mystery.
We just don't know why.
They would not use the term transubstantiation. No.
Yeah. And just a reminder too, we are saved by faith, not faith and 7 sacraments, right?
Right. So we don't need, it's the work of Christ.
They're not salvifically required.
Right.
But they are edifying.
Right.
Right. So they
can grow your faith
and will grow your faith if participated appropriately.
We would think of it as sanctifying. They would think of it as salvific. That's why we flip things. We say justification happens in a moment. They say it happens over. But So we do really have a difference in how we think of sanctification, and
it's a major difference.
So just so everybody knows, justification means like when you are made right with God, and you're given His righteousness. When you give your life at faith, the Catholics would say, no, you begin your justification, you're given the righteousness of Christ and is doled out to you as you faithfully walk. And then we would say that, no, you're justified, and from response, you transform in sanctification as you walk. And so there's just two different ways of doing it.
It's a big distinction, but I would caution us as Protestants who have a lot of freedoms to not take communion lightly when you do come into church, but to expect that you grow in your faith in that situation and just reflecting and understanding what God did for you and what does that mean for your faith and what does that do for the body of Christ? Because I think there is something unique in participating in that, even in ours. You can't just take it like, oh, it's just all a symbol. So as if the symbol means nothing.
Right. That's not it.
Yeah.
And all right, so we have 2 more questions. We have one from Dolores. We have one from Anna. We're not going to have time to get to both of them. So Dolores, we will talk about yours next week.
Because there's going to be a lot to that answer.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot to that answer. Anna's, I think we can sum up pretty quickly. So Anna says, hey, Brent, Greg, and Stephen. Again, she puts them in priority of the most important first.
Yay.
I have a friend who has recently rejected Christianity and has now started to explore Buddhism. She is becoming more crippled and blind each day, her days being filled with a lot of pain, loneliness, frustration. I believe she is just trying to seek peace in any way she can. She has a caretaker to drive her to the store and doctor's appointments, etc. She mentioned to her caretaker that she may want her to drive her to a Buddhist temple as part of her newfound faith. Her caretaker said that she cannot do that because she would be participating in evil. Her caretaker belongs to a very fundamentalist Christian church. My friend told the caretaker that she would no longer be able to work with her over this issue. Although she has not asked me to help her in this way, I have been thinking about how I would respond if she were to ask me to either drive her to the temple or to help research Buddhism online. Honestly, I do not feel right about it, so I am seeking your input and insight. Thanks, guys. Follow up. I just want to clarify my question. Would be driving her to temple to practice Buddhism, or even helping her research Buddhism, and be the same as encouraging someone to sin? Would it be the same as encouraging someone to sin? Like being an accomplice for someone having an affair, or participating in somebody's dishonesty because she is worshiping a false god, or being the getaway driver in a bank robbery. How about that? So what say you guys?
Well, you were listed first, so favorites first.
I would say first and foremost, one of the things I would say in favor of doing that would be the fact that if you were helping her understand Buddhism, you would also be able to inject why you believe Christianity is the true truth, and point out some of the fallacies that Buddhists hold. If you were to drop her off at temple and bring her home from temple, you would have an opportunity for conversation with her about what did she learn, and again, having those opportunities to redirect some of what she's being taught and reaffirm some Christian truths in her life as well. The other thing I was going to say would have been just to steal Greg's thought earlier, but I'll let him stay that one.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that first and foremost, like
you're next in the order.
I know that's. Oh, I thought you were. So
I think I'm last.
I would say, Anna, that you follow your conviction. If the Spirit of God's convicting you of something, then it would be sin for you to do otherwise. And so I would definitely say that it's wisdom to say, no, I cannot do that in good conscience as a Christian. And that's just kind of like how you'd need to leave it. And I think that there is a lot of dangers in Buddhism, from the levels of demonic spirituality involved, to the idea that it is an apathetic religion. It's not one that aims at love. It is one that aims at self-focused removal of life, and it's painted so differently in so many ways, but it really is about like just removal, like getting rid of, and so that's why it's popular for people in pain. So, I wouldn't participate, and I would still try to find times to have conversations about it. So
yeah, I would say I would feel uncomfortable driving them to temple and stuff, but having that conversation. Obviously, you said she left Christianity, so she does have roots there. So, probably if that was me, I would want to sit down and do kind of a comparative. This is the truth that you're seeking, and let's just see what Christianity says, what Buddha says, and let the truth win out. So,
yeah, it's difficult because I do think it is an act of the conscience because of a lot of the individual variables involved, right? So, like, I don't know what your job entails. Does your job entail taking people anywhere they want to go because that's what's required of you to do the job, because that's a different kind of commitment that you've made? Does your job let you recuse yourself of taking people places that you don't really want them to go? Or because that's another thing to consider, because if you're a care provider, does that mean you're just a driver? Because sometimes it just means you go to places that are essential to their health, not necessarily the spirituality. But if it does have that laxity or lax, kind of relational kind of component where you are able to kind of go with them, and you've had a long-standing relationship with somebody, oftentimes if it depends on the nature of your relationship, I would say, like, if you're going to do this, I'm going to walk with you, but I'm not going to say that what you're doing is good. And I might drive you wherever you need to go, but I'm not going to sanction wherever you choose to go. And if that allows me to continue to have a dialogue in your life as you walk through your spiritual journey, and you're open to that, then I might continue to drive you where you need to go. even if it's someplace I disagree with, to have the conversation and to be some kind of salt and light if you don't have anyone else. Because I think my other fear for me, and this would just be, that's why I do think it is a conviction issue, I would be afraid I'd be abandoning you to that darkness instead of being a part of the conversation to a point. But at a certain point, you might have to recuse yourself. This person's like, nope, this is what I want. And you're like, okay, I can't keep taking you there because you've accepted this. You're not exploring it. Then you might have to say, like, you know what, I'm willing to recuse myself because I feel like this is a moral issue that I have the right, in this country, you do have the right to recuse yourself from many things. And we need to start pushing back when we feel our conscience are being violated in the workplace. And I think it's happened so much that it's okay to accommodate everyone else's belief system except for Christian people when it comes to something of our moral conviction. And so you might have to push back and with your job and your work. And I do think that's going to happen more and more in the future where we have to take that ding because we do feel it. But it's not just like a one and done, and not every scenario is the same to me. I might tough out someone. I might hang out with a drunk on a corner while he's drinking to have a spiritual conversation until he decides he doesn't want to listen to me anymore. You know what I mean? I might do that even though I don't sanction the drinking. Okay.
Yeah, I just remember probably the one time I felt this kind of thing, but it was more of I had no way out. I was the designated driver for a person's bachelor party, and we went to this bar.
That's more frustrating.
And kind of hung out at this thing, and I drank water all night and watched guys slowly get drunk till they were like, we're going to the strip club or whatever. And so I tried as best I could to like act like I couldn't find it, but man, they were sober enough to know exactly where it was. And so, yeah, I ended up dropping the whole carload off and sitting in the parking lot for several hours, just kind of like praying and trying to just like figure out, like, what do I do? How, I can't. So it was one of those difficult things as a Christian. So, yeah, you're going to come across those experiences. And I think being prepared ahead of time is always good, knowing that you're going to be able to say, you know what, no, or okay, but this is going to be, it's my car, so these are going to be kind of
make a plan, I would say.
Yeah. So, but if you're convicted about it, don't go there. Romans would, and
definitely, if you think it's better for you not to do that, then don't.
Well, there's a lot we can get into, and we had fun running all over the place. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation as well. And hey, again, if you have any questions or you want any follow-up explanations, or if you got any thoughts, we'd love to hear from you. Send them to us at rabbittrail@obcc.church, and Brent would love to hear all your positive comments about him. Yes. And he would love to know all the wonderful things that he has done. So please send those wonderful things to us at rabbittrail@obcc.church. Otherwise, we're glad that you guys were with us, and we pray that you guys have a great rest of your week. God bless.
Boom, chakalaka.
Bye.